Hi everybody, welcome to ADHD Europe's Talking Thursdays, celebrating ADHD Awareness Month, the Many Faces of ADHD. Today we'll be talking about ADHD through our eyes, youth perspectives. Today we are joined with panelists from United Kingdom and from Canada from an organization called CADDAC. I just wanted to give you a brief description of ADHD Europe. We are connecting your voices with our network of professionals and patients, our voices together to help the people for their futures. Our vision is to share everybody's experiences from across the globe, as there's many people coming from different countries, and we all live in a diverse world today. Our objectives are to promote evidence-based information and raise awareness. And ADHD is a real challenge for someone with ADHD and their loved ones. It's not from our upbringing, it's not the environment, but the environment can influence how it appears to us. Not everything looks like ADHD, but it's always good to consider the possibility of it. So I would like to welcome everybody again, and I wanted to let you know that I'm a mother and a carer of two children, two boys, aged 7 and 23. So I've been through as a carer with the experiences of my son through his education, and myself being a mother, having to look for the necessary information to be the best mother I could and to help him through his life. I would now like to introduce you to Aaron Bailey, who shall present himself and introduce himself. So here we go. Aaron, hi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. As Chantel said, my name is Aaron Bailey. I'm a certified ADHD life coach from the ADD Coach Academy. I've been working in the ADHD, learning disability, mental health field for the last 13 years. I've been an educational assistant in some schools. I worked at a university helping students with ADHD and learning disabilities transition from elementary school to high school and high school to post-secondary. And I've been running my own ADHD business, ADHD coaching business for the last 4 years, where I work with youth from 12 to 7 and adults 18 and up. And I also provide workshops on my experience with ADHD and helping people really dive into the ADHD brain and understand it. My passion for ADHD comes from my lived experience with ADHD. So I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I have the combination type, so I struggle with impulsivity, inattention, and hyperactivity. So that's a lot of fun. I also have a severe learning disability in math. I struggle with generalized anxiety disorder, and I struggle with depression as well. And growing up throughout my life, the immense challenges that I faced, as well as my parents, because they didn't know anything about it, has really driven me to help people learn more about ADHD and to start really taking this shame and guilt off of our shoulders that we all hold. And so I'm super happy to be here to share my perspective and my knowledge of ADHD with you all. And now I would like to pass the virtual microphone to Zandria.
Thanks there, Aaron. I'm Zandria. I'm a neurodivergent PhD student, examining the connection between neurodivergent conditions, which includes ADHD, and substance misuse in university students. And I've been working in the field of neurodiversity on and off for the last 8 years. And next up, we have Tiffany.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. So a little bit about me. I'm a multi-passion entrepreneur. I wear many hats as an ADHD coach, a teacher, a mentor, a facilitator, a consultant, a peer supporter, and I really just consider myself a student of life. And I studied at the ADHD Coach Academy, like Aaron did, and have over a decade of experience working with neurodiverse learners. as an educator in different levels, so from preschool to adulthood. And my mission is really to just help teens and adults with ADHD really learn, understand, and accept and work with their brains rather than against it. So, and empowering them to build lasting change in their personal, their academic, and their professional lives. And I basically work with a lot of professionals, creative students, and entrepreneurs, and just helping them, find strategies that work for their brains and lead more fulfilling lives. So I'm going to pass the mic now to Annie.
Thank you, Tiffany. And thank you, Chantel and ADHD Europe for hosting this and letting us from Canada be part of this. It's very exciting for us. I myself am now also diagnosed with ADHD, late diagnosis, which is kind of surprising considering that I've been living with a family of 4 ADHD children. So I myself am a mother of 4 children, 3 of them having been diagnosed at a fairly young age, and never really realized that I too had ADHD until later on. So, and that later on came when I started working here at CADDAC. So CADDAC is a Center for ADHD Awareness Canada. I am the senior program manager here. And after, it was almost 3 years into working here that I started putting pieces together and realizing that as an adult, I too could have ADHD. And that everything that I tried to provide to my children, and that's how I came to connect with the Center for ADHD Awareness, is to get more resources and more services for my children. So struggling through university or college, some did, some chose not to go. And that's another thing that we could talk about a little bit later on. But in my career as an early childhood educator, I also had the opportunity then to work at a college level. So to teach students on how to be early childhood educators. So I did also see how it is to have ADHD as a student at the college level. So I have that expertise along with my own lived experience, my children's, and what we're doing here at CADDAC now. And we are creating some great tools and resources for young people. So with that, I'm going to pass it over back to Chantel, and I'm going to let maybe Aaron talk a little bit of how he helps us at CADDAC as well. But go ahead.
Okay, so Aaron, before we move on to you, I just wanted to give a little history of my background, of my son's life, because every country is different. So my son was diagnosed in South Africa when he was 7 years old. And my story is quite unique because it was the teacher who picked it up. And all she said to me is, I recommend that he goes for an assessment. And the psychiatrist was very, very supportive. He gave me the choices of treatment. As a parent, I was able to make my own decision. It took me a long time to agree on the medication. And I think one of the things the doctor said is, do you want him to struggle for the rest of his life? But alongside the medication, he went to a lot of psychology, play therapists, everything I could possibly do for him. We moved to, and the teachers knew how to do the accommodation. So that's how it's going to be very interesting later in our panel to hear more about what CADDAC's been doing there. And then we moved to France. And back then when I moved in France, I didn't know that ADHD was TDAH. So I really battled to find a patients organization to help me. So it was really difficult with school accommodations. He got to learn the language very quickly. So that was a blessing. So yeah, that was a good couple of years. I think that was until he was 15. Then from France, we moved to Belgium. And where does mummy go again? Hunting on the internet for information. What can Belgium offer me? And then I stumbled on an organization based in Belgium. And 3 months later, I started volunteering for ADHD Europe. That was in 2018. So I've served on the board of ADHD Europe, and now I'm a full-time volunteer, and I can't stop raising awareness and sharing evidence-based information. And very excited, Aaron, because in Canada, there's a lot of support programs. You're involved in so much. Yes, educational resources are so important. So is the support, especially the youth living with ADHD. So I want to know more about the work you're doing as a volunteer at CADDAC and the impact ADHD has on a young person's life, and how does it affect their self-esteem? Thanks, Aaron. All on to you now.
No problem. Those are big questions. First of all, what I do at CADDAC is I am one of the coaches with Tiffany who runs the youth coaching group. So we have an 8 to 10 week program for youth from, I believe it's 15 to 24, and we're just learning more about ADHD and helping them, like Tiffany said, truly understand how their brain works, and helping them develop some strategies that they can actually work with their brain instead of against it. Now, the big question, how does ADHD affect our self-esteem? My God, how does it not? I think, there is still, unfortunately, a lack of information on ADHD and a lot of misinformation on ADHD. And so a lot of kids grow up thinking that they're stupid, they can't learn, they're not going to go anywhere. And unfortunately, with our education systems, and I think education systems across the globe are struggling with it, it's a lot of focus on the negatives. Sit still, don't move, listen, and we struggle with that. Right? We struggle with our working memory, which is our ability to remember or hold information in our brain. And so we are often forgetful. We get easily distracted. And this builds that false narrative that we're stupid, we can't learn, and it looks more like a behavior issue than, say, a neurodevelopmental issue, which it is. And so what often happens is a lot of kids grow up thinking that they're going to go nowhere in life, right? Some kids refuse to go to college or university because they believe that they can't do it. And so we almost develop this almost self-fulfilling prophecy of we're going to go nowhere in life because of our ADHD. And I myself, I'm 35 and I'm still struggling with some of my experiences from my youth. I will make a mistake and my first thought is I'm an idiot, because this is the belief and value that I've held for so long, right? And this has been the focus of my challenges throughout my childhood. And I think it can be difficult to find the resources, and especially nowadays, finding good, accurate information online. As you said yourself, as a parent, once you're moving, you constantly go online and you're trying to find information. And there's great information out there, and there's also some iffy information out there. So having organizations like ADHD Europe, like CADDAC here in Canada, is incredibly helpful because they are a reliable source for information. And what I love about this youth coaching group and just coaching in general is you see the growth of not only understanding themselves, but the ability to start letting go of some of this shame, this guilt, this embarrassment that we hold onto ourselves, and the beliefs that ADHD is a character flaw. It's our fault that we're doing this. It's the amount of times I'm trying to remember something and I desperately want to remember it and I can't. It looks like I'm choosing not to remember, and it's not a choice. If I could remember, my God, I would, right? And a lot of these kids don't have that vocabulary, right? You're not going to get a young student in school put their hand up and say, oh, I'm running out of dopamine, I need to go move my body. No, they're going to start acting up. They're either going to bug their friends, they're going to say something rude to their teacher to get out of that uncomfortable environment because they don't know what's happening to them. They don't understand the psychology of their brain. And I love working with youth because once you give them that vocabulary, once you give them a better understanding, they then own that and they can take it and they say, oh, I'm not doing this because I'm rude or I'm a bad kid. I'm doing it because my brain is running out of dopamine, and I need to find something to help me focus. I had a youth the other day who's like, "Oh, is it okay if I doodle when I listen? That really helps me." I'm like, "Absolutely." So he wasn't looking at me in the eyes. It didn't look like he was listening to me at all because his doodles were amazing, but he took in so much. And understanding that of yourself is just huge and really helpful to start building that self-confidence, start building that self-esteem back up, and really changing the filter or the lens in which we see life. We see life through this negative lens that I'm a bad kid. I'm unmotivated. I'm lazy. I'm disrespectful. Oh, it drives me crazy. Because what's underneath that? Are you not starting something because you don't actually want to do it, or you can't remember, or you think it's going to take forever, or you don't have enough dopamine, or the reward isn't big enough, so you need to do more, right? The more we understand ADHD and ourselves, the more we can actually develop strategies that work for us and kind of own it and say, ADHD isn't who I am. It is a part of me. And again, like Chantel said, not Chantel, sorry, like Tiffany said, you can start working with your brain instead of against it. And I just think that's beautiful. And that's really, unfortunately, how ADHD can affect our self-esteem quite significantly.
Well, Aaron, thank you so much for sharing this information, because it's new for me. And I think it's really wonderful to hear how you work with the youth.
Yeah, and I mean, Annie just said something in our little chat box there too. She reminded me that there's a William Dodson estimates on average kids hear 20,000 more negative messages by age 10 on average. So think about how they think about themselves and how they see the world. I'm a bad kid. I'm always doing something wrong, right? And so if somebody asks you something, you think you're always in trouble. When I was an EA, my principal would call me into the office, and the first thing I thought, I'm fired. I did something wrong. I'm in trouble. I still think like that at 35. Whenever my wife wants to talk to me, oh, I did something wrong.
Yeah.
Right? I am so used to making mistakes and being the bad kid.
Yeah.
And that's the belief we have on ourselves. And that's just awful. And it just wreaks havoc on us.
Well, we had a comment from Zandria. We have a chat box at the back here. So Zandria was saying that she could totally resonate with that. So I don't know if you want to ask anything, Zandria, or it was just a comment that you had on what Aaron was saying.
It was really just a kind of comment that I'm someone who was late diagnosed as well, and that was quite a common experience that I had when I was a kid, and it's stayed with me to this day as well.
Well, thank you very much, Aaron. I'm going to now remove you off the stage, but we'll bring you back on just now, so don't disappear. And I am very happy to have Zandria with us. She's a professional member of ADHD Europe, and she's been looking into the impact of ADHD and neurodivergent conditions while at university, and the connection between this and substance abuse. Zandria is currently in the early stages of her research and is working on the data analysis for her first study. Zandria, could you please tell us about your background and what the pre-existing research says about the connection, and how people with ADHD or other neurodivergent conditions find time at university?
Of course. Well, I've been working with neurodivergent young people and students for the last 8 years. And in that time, I noticed that there was a lot of issues surrounding substance use that wasn't really being looked into. And when I started actually examining the research, I found that there's just not that much, which means we don't really understand the full extent of the situation. And that's why I'm doing my PhD. So I found that for a lot of the neurodivergent conditions, there's only a handful of studies, and the findings are quite conflicting, with some finding that neurodivergent people are more likely to struggle with substance use, and some finding they're less likely to. But some of the conditions have had slightly more research and produced more consistent results. And ADHD is one of those conditions. And it's been found that young people with ADHD are more likely to struggle with substance use than young people without it. And as I mentioned before, I'm looking at neurodivergent university students specifically. And that's because this is a really important time period and area to be aware of, because university has been found to be a uniquely challenging time for neurodivergent young people. Firstly, this transition generally comes at a time where people who take medication for ADHD, especially in the UK, are transitioning from adolescent to adult mental health services. And generally, they stop being prescribed their medication. Despite the guidance being in place, research has found that about 20% of young people who are taking their medication before they're 18 successfully transition from adolescent to adult services and can continue to take this medication. This is obviously difficult for all young people with ADHD, but especially for those who are starting or attending university during that time, it's a huge concern, because consistent use of medication for ADHD not only helps them manage their symptoms, but it's also linked to higher levels of academic achievement and reduced risk of substance use. But even neurodivergent university students who aren't struggling with that also have difficulties with the transition to university. And research has found that neurodivergent students report that this time is overwhelmingly difficult, and they experience significant apprehension, poor sleep, loneliness, and sensory difficulties to a greater extent than non-neurodivergent university students. And throughout their time at university, neurodivergent young people report high levels of distress, mental health difficulties, and are more likely to drop out. This is why... You've been pulled back in, Aaron?
Yeah, I sorry for interrupting, but what you're saying is resonating with me so much, because I've worked with so many youth at this transition point, and what I've seen is that people who are diagnosed or aren't diagnosed with ADHD are kind of surviving in high school. They're getting by, and so they're not developing strategies. They're not learning about their ADHD. And what you're saying about that transition to post-secondary, where they have more responsibility, maybe they're living by themselves, courses are harder, they need to have these strategies, and they don't have them in place. And then that sense of overwhelm and dread is just huge. And we know with ADHD that we feel life and feel emotions more intensely, so that idea of discomfort or even pain can be overwhelming, and we can often try to escape that by using certain substances. And I know I have addiction that runs through my family, and I have an addictive personality. But if you don't know that, and if you're not aware that we are at higher risks of addiction, it can be super easy to fall down that trap, especially with the socialization in post-secondary and more of that freedom. So I just wanted to pop in and say that, because you were just spot on from the experience that I've been having with my clients. I'll leave now.
That was great. I think that's kind of a pretty universal experience for young people with ADHD. And you kind of mentioned some of the difficulties with coping strategies and not really figuring those out. And that's actually one of the reasons that research thinks there is that increased risk of substance use in young people with ADHD and other neurodivergent conditions, because it's actually been found that neurodivergent young people start using substances as an attempt to cope with the stresses and difficulties related to their conditions. So things like insomnia, hyperactivity, social anxiety, sensory overload, and that kind of thing are really common reasons for why people first start using substances. And although they might initially help, it's been found that this tends to worsen the situation later on and make it harder to get help for substance use, but also for the difficulties that they're experiencing because of their neurodivergent condition. But obviously there's a huge lack of research, so we don't really understand it properly. And hopefully in the future, we will. And we'll be able to better help neurodivergent young people who are struggling with this. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Zandra. We wish you the best of luck with your research, and of course welcome you back to share it when you've got more information for us and to help educate those. Tiffany, welcome on screen. A lot of what Zandra is saying can resonate with you from your lived experience. Can you tell us, how was it at school? What helped you? And what did you wish you had more help with?
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you, Zandra, for sharing all this. I think that it's not talked about enough. And when ADHD goes unseen, the cost is extremely high. As Zandra mentioned, more likely to turn to substances. There's even research showing that, more likely to be more prone to accidents and live 8 to 13 years less than those without ADHD if, we don't get the help and the proper treatment. So early diagnosis and support doesn't just change lives, it can actually save years of life. And I know that cost firsthand. A bit of my experience growing up, I was a good student. I got the good grades. I was part of a lot of extracurricular activities, sports teams, the dance programs, you name it. And I was just always busy and active. And so on paper, everything looked fine. That's why my ADHD was fallen under the radar. It's a story that many overachieving girls with ADHD know too well. And so I didn't cause trouble in class. I was the one that was, sitting behind the back seat and just hoping that no one would call me, no teacher. And but internally I was constantly feeling overwhelmed and out of place. And I was bullied a lot growing up. I struggled a lot socially and I could barely pay attention to class. I would then play catch up at home, just trying to understand the material. And so people on the outside saw me as this overachiever, but internally it was chaos. I'd lose things daily, my bag, my wallet, my keys, credit cards. I think I've lost at least 30 of them in my life. And then you find it like under a couch. But that disorganization, the papers everywhere, the messy locker, that was my school experience. And, I would sometimes have to go after school to find a janitor to open my locker because I forgot an important assignment or a project. And what you named before, what Zandra and Erin were naming before as well with after high school, that's when things got more challenging for me post-secondary because suddenly the structure is, lost. It's something that kept me afloat. And university was this whole free-for-all, right? Like no one's checking if you're going to class. And so you can choose to go or not. And what it led me to was leaving things last minute, skipping class to catch up and cramming, pulling all-nighters, and sometimes even sleeping in the library. And so I was juggling a lot. I had, 3 jobs at the time, going through a lot of challenges growing up at home. My parents getting a divorce, living in a low-income home. So there's a lot of financial stress, and on top of it, and managed ADHD that I had no idea about. And so that transition period, I wasn't taking care of myself at all. I wasn't, participating in any sports or dance, which is something that really brought me joy. And so my self-care was out the door. And what I began to do was numb, partying, drinking to forget, basically chasing this relief from the pain and the pressure and the shame that I was going through. And, when we talk about addiction, it works on the same dopamine circuitry that's affected in ADHD. And so, any type of behavior gives us this temporary pleasure or calm, even when it causes harm. And you keep going back because for a moment it works. And that's what it did for me. It gave my brain a sense of belonging, a sense of relief, and it just helped me escape from the constant noise that was going on inside my head. And by the time I turned 22, that's when I hit rock bottom. Years of masking and, trying to keep it together, smiling on the outside. And in reality, I was, drowning and smiling on the inside. And substances was my way of quieting the noise. And I'll never forget this day is when a friend came up to me and noticed me for the first time. And she said, "Tiff, I'm really worried about you." I get emotional every time I share this because it's so impactful. Are you okay? And it took me a while to actually hear that, because at first I brushed it off. I'm like, yeah, of course I'm fine. Everything's okay. But eventually it caught up to me and I couldn't hide anymore. And so that's when my mask started to slip off. And that night was one of my darkest hours, and I picked up a journal for the first time and I started writing, and no filter. I was just brain dumping what was going on. And I'm actually going to read to you. I have it here. My journal entry. This was March 5th, 2017, 1:58 a.m. So obviously couldn't sleep. And so I wrote, "I think there's something deeply wrong with my brain. I'm not quite sure what it is. Why are you so forgetful? Why can't you concentrate? Why do you always leave things last minute? Why are you so disorganized? Why are you so all over the place? Why can't you remember things like others? And why are you always so late? Why are you so dumb and lazy? Why are you so inconsistent? Why are you so impulsive? Why can't you just listen and pay attention? Why are you so emotional? Why can't you just be normal?" And I didn't know at the time what was going on. And so I remember taking these questions, and like Chantal was like, "I need to find out like what's going on." And going through Google to find, answers. And that's when I stumbled upon ADHD, the word. And it was like the missing piece of the puzzle that I didn't even know I was trying to solve. And that's when that moment changed everything for me. It was the first time where I stopped, being behind the "I'm fine" mask, and I started doing the work, started therapy, and started to learn everything I could about this brain of mine. And because I truly believe that understanding your brain is not just education, it's liberation. And I started dancing again. Dance is my, one of the biggest blessings in my life. It gave me an outlet to process my emotions. Started doing yoga, meditation. I found community. I became a certified coach. I studied at the ADHD Coach Academy, and then, obviously learned tools for my own life and for my clients. And this is big, especially for youth, because I think understanding your brain is one of the most important things, and it can help you design a life that works for you. And I think there was a lot of different, mix of things that helped me rebuild my life. This was not all at once. It was piece by piece, little by little. But I think to answer your question too, Chantal, was what is it that I wish I had more help with, is that if I could go back, I wish that teachers knew ADHD in girls, that it's not always loud, that sometimes it's this like silent burnout behind perfect grades. And I wish that I had someone to talk to at the time. I wish that people would ask, like, what's not what's wrong with you, but what do you need, and how can I support? I wish there was obviously more conversations around mental health, which is why it's so important. And the work that Erin and I are doing alongside with Annie, with CADDAC, I think these are important conversations, because if they go unaddressed, that's when we can turn to these substances as a way to cope with the pain. And I talk about this very openly to the youth. And I wish, back then I had accommodations at school. I know we're going to talk about them today. Early support, intervention. But you know what? I don't necessarily regret any of it, just because there's a reason for it for me. I turned this past pain into power. And I think that's what I share right now is, I know that a lot of people here, thousands of kids, students out there, and adults Professionals appear to look fine, but they're barely hanging on, and you might even know one, or you might be that person. So I think, yeah, that's exactly what we're doing here with CADDAC. It's kind of helping the youth like grow their spark back, right? And before the world tells them to dim it. And yeah, I think shame, I love this quote, I forget who it says it, but it's shame dies when it's shared in safe spaces. That's really our desire to do that, is to create those safe spaces for teens, for the youth to come to and to finally understand what's going on in their brains, and find tools to really help them, support them.
Well, Tiffany, thank you so much for sharing your experience. And I felt the emotion and where you're coming from. You know, I wish I had a family member or a teacher or someone in my social circle that would have given me the support and love and be understanding. For example, I lost my parents at a young age, so I moved a lot in different homes. And it was quite strange because my friend's mother would adopt me, so I had their love and so forth. But they just wanted to make me happy, so we were allowed to go dancing, because we used to have, you know, underage dancing at the school, at the high school, which was all normal back in the day, you know. And we're allowed to go to the beach and do all these really fun stuff. But, you know, I think you went through the same as me by being undiagnosed for so many years. And then we start becoming little ladies at 12, 13 years old. And then we like really don't concentrate at school, and we rather think about everything else than our education. So there's a lot of things I wish I could change from my past, and things that I know now that I could have, you know, done better. So I really feel what you're saying, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think me and you can talk forever about ADHD girls and women. So let's do that another time. But without further ado, I would like to put your colleague on screen, Annie. Welcome, Annie.
Thank you.
I just want to remove Tiffany. There we go. Annie, I am so excited to hear what you've got to say, because obviously as a mother, I've really been battling with accommodations at school. I'm not too sure what post-secondary is, because that's what you're going to be talking about today, right?
So universities and colleges.
Okay, cool. Because my son's currently in, just to give you the scoop, in Belgium and Europe, all he gets is to sit in a quiet room during the exam time, single-sided, so he doesn't have to have an issue with the double-sided. He's allowed paper to make notes or scribble, or I don't know why they give him the paper. He's got extra time and there's no distractions. But for me, that's just exam accommodations. It's not the life at university. So Annie, I would love you to tell us about the accommodations chart and the toolkit that CADDAC have created, because this is just absolutely amazing best practices and tools that are available, freely available on your website, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we also have translated it in French. So we have the English and the French version on our website. But yeah, the Center for ADHD Awareness Canada, or CADDAC, created not only one for the post-secondary education, so an accommodation chart for students at that level, but also elementary and high school, or secondary school. So every level of education, we have an accommodation chart. They all are very similar, and they're all based on basically symptoms from the DSM-5 for ADHD. But we also have one for workplace accommodations. So just to say, so you can go on the CADDAC website, and in the general info tab, you could find the different age groups, and then the accommodations based on that. These accommodations are, like I said, based on so, for example, fails to give close attention to details or makes careless mistakes. And that could also be then reflected in one of the questions to diagnose a child or an individual with ADHD. So it kind of links in with that. And then the possible results in that is, let's say, difficulty with details in an essay, such as checking sources and biography, forgetting to double check grammar spellings, poor quality of work, poor time management. So often leaving time, doesn't leave time to complete the details or check for mistakes because they're always at the last minute. So a lot of these symptoms, as we all know, ADHD is, something where we struggle with our executive functions. And a lot of those ADHD symptoms that are identified here are based on that, because that's what we would need to be able to complete assignments, to be able to recall the information on exam. So I'm curious, Chantel, if your son had to get any kind of official diagnosis and present that to the, to an accessibility center at the school. Here in Canada, that is what's expected.
Wow.
Yeah, so for most students, they have to go to get their official diagnosis before they could get any kind of accommodations. But what we do say is, for those knowing how hard it is to get that diagnosis, to get that appointment with the specialist, and the fact that you need to get that to be able to get those accommodations, some of these accommodations that we have in our chart, you could kind of adapt and create to find ways to help yourself. So maybe not in terms of, having that exam in a different classroom, a more quiet classroom, which some do. So my daughter was very lucky, and she was able to do that. So any exam that she had, because she had a full diagnosis and she had gone to the accessibility center and claimed, and asked for what she believes she needed. And that's the other part of this. As an individual with ADHD, you need to understand your ADHD. You need to be able to identify what your strengths are and what your struggles are. And sometimes that's hard, right? So going back through the years and figuring out what worked and what didn't work will help you. But so my daughter knew that when she does exams, if there's noise in the classroom, when people are standing up because they're done already, that not only, will make her more anxious, but also lose focus. So part of her accommodation is that she needs to book a room. Anytime she knows there's an exam, she will herself have to go book a special isolated room for her to be able to go and sit there and do her exam. Now, this has to be agreed upon with the faculty, with the professor, but she's lucky enough to be able to do that. When she was in high school, so, prior to going into college or university, she also had that accommodation, and she was lucky enough that the teachers allowed her to have earphones on. So she didn't even hear the noise from the outside. And she was able to have calming music. Now, that had to be approved by the professor or by the people who were monitoring that room. But yeah, she was really lucky to be able to do that. And then, there's other accommodations in here that talk about note-taking, So note-taking, yes, if you have an official diagnosis and you've gone through the accessibility center, you can ask for printed copies of the PowerPoint presentations, the audio tape of the presentations perhaps. But if you don't have that full diagnosis and you haven't been able to get to the accessibility center, There are now AI techniques of note-taking, or you can work with a classmate and ask a classmate to provide you with their notes if you know that they're good note takers. So using the people around you, and I'm not saying using, but working with people around you, and even you don't even have to really disclose that you have ADHD. You could just say, I'm really bad at taking notes. Is there any way that you could help me in sharing your notes so I could revise and make sure that there's no pieces missing? So there's different accommodations, and Chantel, I'm hoping that maybe you will be sharing this accommodation chart, because
yes, definitely.
Yeah,
sorry, I'm interrupting. How ADHD like.
We all do.
I was actually in a strengthening health literacy workshop today. And because us as ADHD people like to multitask, so I'm listening at the workshop and I was reading through your charts in preparation for this afternoon. And I was actually looking at this and I thought, if only the teachers could see this, if they could see that how a student has difficulties with or without ADHD, because a person doesn't have to have ADHD to daydream. You don't have to have ADHD to miss information or to pull a funny face, And then even some of the possible accommodations, it's just really, really amazing. So after this meeting, and in the future, I'd really, because my brain was just going a bit all over the place with information that I thought could be adapted here, or like what you were verbally saying, because I just think that's absolutely amazing. Anything to help people, and especially I will be showing this to my son because he's had to adapt. Even though he can speak French, understand French, he started now watching, because he thinks his professor's so boring. So he now watches another professor on YouTube, but in English.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is that, we're interest-based, right? So if the professors are not keeping your interest up, most likely you will be losing concentration and not want to follow. And that's funny because not funny. I kind of taught my kids. So that's the other part is, advocating for yourself and learning, like I said, learning, your style. So understanding who you are, understanding how you function best. With my children when they were growing up, so I think I did mention in my intro, I do have 4 children. All of them have ADHD. Now, 3 of them were diagnosed as a young child. And coming back to what Tiffany and you were saying about ADHD in girls and women, my oldest daughter, who was never officially diagnosed, and is now a teacher, she does have ADHD. She sure knows it as an adult now that her ADHD is there. But growing up, she didn't know and she didn't ask for the accommodations. But what she did do and what she figured out is that when she had choices in her courses, if you have a choice in your course and that some teachers are more monotone and might not keep your attention, don't take that course with that prof. Go to a prof that maybe has more of your same energy, right? So those are things that they really figured out to do, right? So go to courses, take programs and courses that are interest-based. The other part to it is don't expect that you will be necessarily completing your 4-year bachelor's or, your 4-year degree in 4 years. It's okay to make it longer, right? And part of all that, we have that toolkit. Also transitioning from secondary school over to university or colleges that will really support you and help you understand things that
it's
you
just
should be
breaking
looking.
up there a bit, Amy. It was just breaking
Oh.
up there a little bit.
Sorry. I was just saying that transitioning toolkit might be a good thing to help those students moving into university who are who might struggle with that substance use, with that feeling of, I wrote when Aaron was speaking, we're going to go nowhere in life because we have ADHD, remembering that if we're well equipped, we could get there. So that is what CADDAC's trying to do. And we're creating more and more things for young people, because early intervention is the key. And that's what we're here for. So we're hoping to be able to support them.
Well, this is really exciting, and really happy to be part of the CADDAC family on the other side of the pond in Europe. I really do hope that in the future we'll hear about more best practices from other countries, and also share information and have these meaningful conversations with each other. Because the one thing like I'm finding in Europe is there's a lot of youth programs, but it's not for that I've seen with cognitive disabilities. Maybe they do exist when it comes to the youth. I know the youth will go to Strasbourg and to Parliament and they're advocating, but it's not for ADHD. So I really hope in the future we can create an army of advocates to make change with policy. We're going to have to start wrapping up, but if you could briefly let me answer this question, and I'll start with Aaron. How do you see the future of youth with ADHD? What do you think is needed more and what is needed less?
Oh my God, what a question. What do I see of the future of ADHD?
The youth.
For youth. I mean, what I would love to see.
Do you want to think about it?
Oh, no, I got it. What I would love to see is more awareness, more education for either educators, caregivers, whomever, parents potentially, because not only if the youth can better understand their ADHD, but if their support network can better understand it, then that's going to help everybody involved. That's going to reduce the tension, reduce the stress on everybody. And if we can, like Annie was saying, if we can really hit on early intervention, we can possibly avoid situations like, Tiffany being later diagnosed and going through that. I mean, Tiffany, what you said was just absolutely beautiful. And like, I can't even, because the frustrating thing for me is that, especially in the education system, it feels like not much has changed in the last 20 years since I felt like an idiot and felt like a piece of crap and couldn't go anywhere. And I hope for the future of youth in the next 20 years, that's going to change, and that we stop missing, especially women and girls, we stop missing that diagnosis. We start understanding ADHD on a much deeper level. It's so much more than hyperactivity, inattention, and impulsivity. That doesn't even scratch the surface of ADHD. And so my hope is more awareness, more education. And I think that's coming, right? There are so many people going into ADHD coaching programs because the need is so high, again, globally. What was your other question? I forgot.
I think I'm going to move on to the next person, because Aaron, I love it that you love speaking. I think sometimes I speak too much. Zandria, for yourself, how do you see the future of the youth with ADHD, and what is needed more and what is needed less?
Well, I'm hopeful for the future for youths with ADHD. I think that awareness and research is growing. So I'm hoping that there's more recognition, understanding, and kindness towards people with ADHD, which is just massively needed, and less judgment and shame.
Thanks so much, Sandra. Tiffany. For
That's a good question. I had to really sit with it, but I think what's coming up for me is a lot more like representation and awareness when it comes to also workplace and school. So I think like maybe for companies later on, or I know it's in the works too, but just having more like ADHD friendly structures in place. And yeah, definitely less shame, more understanding. And I feel like I'm missing one here. It's the last of the call. My brain is farting at the moment,
my
but
brain is farting. I love it.
yeah, it's just like a lot more. It's not a one size fits all. So having probably like centers out there where it's a more holistic approach. There's medication, there's coaching, there's therapy, there's all these possibilities out there. But having a space where you can go to really get the help, right? Get the proper diagnosis, the proper treatment. I think that's that's important.
Thanks, Tiffany. Annie.
So I always have to take notes or else I'm going to forget. So, from each one of you, I've put a few quotes that I said, that you said, I mean. But what you just said, Tiffany, in terms of it's not a one size fits all, that's exactly it. So making sure that, again, I'll repeat, and I can't repeat enough, we need to understand ourselves and talk about our own ADHD and how it affects us. And as often as many people talk about their own ADHD, people will start realizing that ADHD is not a one thing. It's many things, and it includes so many things. And if teachers, medical professionals, and everyone around can start understanding that, I think that will be what we need. But also, I'm so optimistic from watching these youth that participate in ours. We also have peer facilitated support groups for youth, and listening to them and listening to the ones who are taking Aaron and Tiffany's coaching programs. I'm so optimistic for the future. They are wanting to understand more. They are wanting to share more. They are speaking out. Good. And wanting to be great advocates. And I think that's what might not have been in the past because of that stigma. So let's break through that stigma, but also break through those myths, and some of them are, treatment related, medication related. And I know Tiffany and I have had that conversation, how some of the young people thought they can't have medication because, they're addictive. Well, that's a myth, and that's out there. So let's break those myths and let's provide them with those accurate information and research based. So Zandra, research like you're doing, is so valuable, and collecting all that information together. So yeah, I'm optimistic, and I think, we all know the youth are our future. So let's, give them what they need.
Thank you very much, Annie. I had a thought to also to wrap up, but I got totally distracted because I'm getting SMSs. And I told the non-ADHD person I will, be busy. So I've totally lost my thought. But now I just remembered, which is a really great feeling. I think it's really amazing that the youth in Canada are getting to know the ADHD and able to speak out about it. And I'll be very happy to give you the information, which also came out during our ADHD Awareness Month campaigning from Europe, is becoming an expert with your lived experience. And there's a whole lot of opportunities to, once you've got the confidence and you've got the tools, and I wouldn't say the tools is a lot of tools, because you apply it to what makes you feel happy and comfortable. You never know. They might be on TV. They might be writing articles in a magazine and interviewed. They might be knocking on the door of the health ministries. They might finally say to their grumpy uncle, hey, you in the education department, you know, this is what's happening on the ground. And, you know, do you guys know about it? Are you going to do anything about it? You know, so you never know when a person's just got that little bit of information to say the right things to try help. I would like to thank all of you for your time, and I wish you all a lovely day, and thank you for tuning in. Bye.